Philippine Senate rejects charter change
Nasabon na agad ang pirma. Bakit hindi nila
Retired Supreme Court Chief Justice Hilario David Jr.
Another framer of the 1987 Constitution is turning down.
Philippine congressional leaders say they will pursue charter amendments next year, even without the Senate's participation.
Yes, Direk. Magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. Maingay sa ere, pahayagan at social media ang bangayan ng Kongreso at Senado patungkol sa paraan sa pagbabago ng 1987 Philippine Constitution. Sa kabilang dako, patuloy ang kontrobersya kung sinong nasa likod at nagpopondo sa pagkukolekta ng pirma para sa isang People's Initiative. Why are some sectors like the Catholic Bishops' Conference, Catholic Educational Association in the Philippines, UP political science professors, among others, wary of charter change or cha-cha? This is not the first time the national leaders attempted to change the 1987 Constitution. All administrations after President Corazon Aquino proposed changes. There were proposals to shift to a parliamentary system, lift term limits of elected officials, amend restrictive economic provisions, and shift to federalism. But none of these attempts succeeded. So we ask, will this recent move to change the Constitution prosper? Or perhaps the better question to ask is, why should we care about the Constitution? In this afternoon's online forum organized by the Philippines Communication Society in conjunction with TVUP, we will try to understand the context, issues and concerns, and the implications of what is perceived as a sinister move of self-centered politicians to change the Constitution. Welcome to Cha-Cha-Cha, mga Indayog at Ritmo sa Pagpapalit sa Saligang Batas. I am Mike Navalio, your moderator. We're streaming live on YouTube at the TVUP channel and the Facebook pages of TVUP and the Philippines Communication Society. We are also being cross-posted by the Facebook pages of the Philippine Political Science Association, the UST Journalism Society, and Press1.ph. And we're also viewed on TVUP Signal Channel 101. We'd also like to acknowledge the help of we are streaming live courtesy of the Philippines Communication Society and TVUP, but we would also like to acknowledge the help of the following to make this forum possible. We have TVUP, Philippine Political Science Association, and the Catholic Educational Association of the Philippines. For those who are registered via Zoom, we will soon be sending your certificates of attendance through email. Now, if you are interested in joining PCS and its relevant projects, here's how. And before we officially start the discussions, the Vice President of the Philippines Communication Society, Dr. Leonor Hernando, will deliver the welcome remarks. Dr. Lenny? Dr. Lenny, I think you're on mute. VP Lenny, I think you're on mute.
Yes. Okay.
Go
Attorney
ahead, please.
Mike, hello. Good afternoon. Okay. Bilang mga guro, marami na po kaming napagtapos sa mga dalubhasa sa komunikasyon. Gayun din naman, meron din po kaming publikasyon mula noon hanggang ngayon kung saan naitala namin at nasuri ang mga kaganapan sa ating lipunan. Kami po ay mga advocates para sa malayang pamamahayag at pagbibigay ng balanseng impormasyon. In the interest of discussing relevant issues among academicians and communication practitioners, PCS, or the Philippines Communication Society, in partnership with TBUP and some media organizations, has held a series of webinars on artificial intelligence and several election-related topics, the latter dubbed as the National Forum on Communication and Democracy, Philippine Elections 2022, was recently awarded during the 20th Wheel Awards under the category on issues, management, and crisis communication. Ito po ang aming pinakabagong nakamit na karangalan. Ang ating pong usapin ngayong hapon ay sadyang napaka-importante para sa atin bilang mga mamamayan ng Pilipinas. Ang ating pong saligang batas o konstitusyon ay ang pinakapundasyon ng batas at galaw ng ating gobyerno. Ang pagpapalit nito ay mangangahulugang magbibigay din ng pagbabago sa ating nakasanayang ekonomiya, politikal, sosyal at mga nakasanayan ng gawain at karapatan. Kaya tayo po ay tumutok sa ating programa at alamin ang mahalagang usaping ito. Kaya balik na sa iyo, Attorney Mike.
Thank you very much, VP Lenny, for stating the relevance and importance of this discussion to our Philippine democracy. Charter change, otherwise known as cha-cha, is befittingly likened to the dance cha-cha. Cha-cha is a dance rooted in Cuba, described as a fun, flirtatious dance with playful energy. That's from the website called dancingforbeginners.com. Now, like in the cha-cha dance, the partner, or voters in this case, are lured and charmed to sign a petition to change the constitution by dangling welfare funds. Meanwhile, the squabbles between Congress and the Senate connote the playful energy between dance partners. In a dance, cadence and timing are important. If there's a misstep, it ruins the beauty and fluidity of the movement. It disrupts order and it brings about chaos. Thus, today we will dissect the issues on charter change and provide a better understanding of the political, economic, and legal context, alternatives, and implications of changes in the 1987 Constitution. Sa ating talakayan po ngayong hapon, susubukan nating masagot ang 5 katanungan. Ano nga bang saligang batas? Gaano kahalaga ito sa demokrasya ng bansa? Bakit marami ang nagtangkang baguhin ito pero hindi naging matagumpay? Totoo nga ba ang mga nakasaad sa Article 12 on National Economy and Patrimony ng 1987 Constitution ay hadlang sa pag-unlad ng bayan? Napapanahon ba ang pagpapalit sa ibang parte ng saligang batas? At pinagkakatiwalaan ba ng bayan ang kasalukuyang kongreso sa pamamaraan sa pagpanday ng di umano'y mas makabansa, maunlad at mas realistic na provisions? Now, joining us in this discussion are 3 well-respected experts. To discuss the political context of the Constitution is a political science professor from UP Diliman, and she is a member of the Philippine Political Science Association, Dr. Jean Encinas Franco. Dr. Franco, good afternoon.
Magandang hapon, Mike. Magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. Thank you for joining us, and I'd like to thank the Philippine Communication Society and the Philippine Political Science Association and the organizers of this very important webinar for inviting me. No?
Right. Good to see you, Dr. Franco. Now, to dissect the arguments of Congress on the need to amend the economic provisions is the former Undersecretary of Finance and UP Economics Professor, Dr. Cielo Magno. Professor Magno, welcome to the program.
Good afternoon, Mike. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this discussion.
All right. And we are also fortunate to have one of the framers of the 1987 Constitution, a lawyer who was once the Comelec chairperson and a founder and honorary chair of an election watchdog, the Legal Network for Truthful Elections, or LENTE, Attorney Christian Monsod. Attorney Monsod, good afternoon. All right. So let's begin our discussion this afternoon with Dr. Franco. Give us a sense, Dr. Franco, of just how important the Philippine Constitution is and what's the position of the Political Science Department of UP with respect to this proposed charter change? Dr. Franco.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. I would like to read the position of our department, which was also presented in a hearing in 2022 in the House of Representatives. So this is our statement. Historically, Philippine initiatives to change the constitution were made to break from the immediate past and usher in a new political order. For instance, the 1935 Constitution provided the transition and vision of a post-American colonial regime in the Philippines. The 1973 Constitution institutionalized one-man rule. The 1987 Constitution dismantled the dictatorship and offered solutions to heightened social injustices that authoritarian rule had engendered. Furthermore, institutionalizing democratic checks and balances across the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government, as well as civil society's power in relation with the state. Simply put, the overarching change envisioned in the current constitutional reform process must articulate the nature of the break that it wishes to achieve. It must also be crystal clear that the problems the charter revision wishes to address cannot be done through regular legislation and/or executive action. Our people need to hear from the political leadership answers that are based on grounded and evidence-based claims. Our people deserve no less. While constitutional amendments may not require any special historical moments, revisions in practice were usually undertaken after some major upheavals like revolutions, coups, post-colonial wars, democratic uprisings, post-peace agreement managed transitions, or after a regime change, such as when left-leaning governments were elected into power in several Latin American countries. Since 2016, several proposed resolutions in both chambers of Congress, including those favoring the federal shift or a charter change, claim that there is a quote-unquote public clamor for the shift or change. Opinion polls belie this. In a September 2022 Pulse Asia survey, charter change was not in the list of urgent national concerns. Any attempt to amend the Constitution or change the charter requires prior consultative and deliberative processes involving a genuinely informed citizenry. The claim that there is public clamor for constitutional change remains unsubstantiated to this day. The realities of the fiscal and logistical demands required to roll out credible and substantive processes to change the Constitution make it an even more problematic pursuit, especially in the face of more urgent and immediate local and national problems. We also humbly remind our honorable decision makers that constitutional change is not the silver bullet or the holy elixir to cure our country's problems. It is not a panacea to remedy our socio-economic ills or the only means to accomplish our national desires and aspirations. Reforms can be accomplished through an appropriate mix of legislation and policy interventions and not simply through constitutional amendments or even institutional overhaul. Existing laws can be reviewed and amended, and processes and practices safeguarded and improved. In fact, economists argue that the policy framework of the Philippines is already liberalized enough with legislation already in place. These are just excerpts from our statement because the statement is quite long, but let me end, and this is my own take. If we observe current developments, the way I see it is that the process seems to be a done deal, therefore drowning the voices of those who oppose it because of the way the process is being fast-tracked and, if I may say, railroaded. My sense is that those who oppose charter change must already prepare to launch a campaign against it in the run-up to the plebiscite. So thanks, this is all for now. We'll be happy to respond to questions and comments later.
All right, thank you, Dr. Franco. And just a reminder for our viewers that you can send your questions through if you're on Zoom, you can send it through chat, or if you're on our social media pages, we are now being cross-posted on CIAP, UST Journalism Society, Press1.ph, and Philippine Political Science Association. You can send your comments there, and we will try to read your questions to our resource persons later on. So now, one of the issues that has been raised to justify changing the constitution has been supposedly for better economic prospects for the Philippines. And whom better to talk about this other than Dr. Shelo Magno, who was with the administration, and she is now with the UP School of Economics. Dr. Shelo, can you tell us about the truth about the proposed economic amendments?
Thank you, Mike. Let me share my screen and give a quick presentation on charter change and FDI. No? Maybe let me start with why we want FDI. So of course, this is based on the literature. It can increase productivity, facilitate transfer of technology, reduce unemployment. It can improve human capital, improve capital flow, and of course, it can create a competitive market. But we also have to understand, kasi ngayon, the way we package FDIs is it's like a silver bullet. This is the only missing link not to our economic growth. That we have to understand that in the development economic literature, there are also concerns on why, even with FDIs, we do not see growth in economies. And this is what we call threshold externalities. So based on the literature, it says that developing countries need to have reached a certain level of development in education, technology, infrastructure, and health. Ini-emphasize po dito na hindi sapat na nag-attract lamang tayo ng foreign direct investment. We need to develop these sectors to make sure that we really benefit from the growth in the sector. Without high-level investment in human capital, we are not going to see rapid growth from FDIs. Okay? There's also this tendency that FDIs can crowd out domestic investment, meaning na lumiliit instead, because now the thinking is, oh, we need additional foreign direct investment to augment the current domestic capital that's available in the market. And based on existing literature, FDIs can actually crowd in, meaning nag-a-add nga siya, but it can also crowd out domestic investment, and it can be neutral. And it's because of the various types of FDIs in a country. And I think these things, the need to invest in human capital, the need to understand what type of FDIs we need to attract in the country are important conversations that the administration should be doing to be able to attract FDIs. Okay. And at the same time, there's also a discussion if you want to attract high-tech FDIs. It's important to address technology gap. Sometimes an FDI would come in partnering with the domestic sector, but it doesn't mean that the whole business sector would benefit from it. So we have to make sure that while we're attracting high-tech investment, we are also addressing the technology gap between domestic enterprise and foreign investors. Okay, so clearly, I want to look at the global context of FDIs, and we are seeing here a decline in available foreign direct investment flow. So what does this mean for us? It means that the sector, the demand for FDIs becoming more competitive. Countries have to be competitive to be able to attract FDIs. And to put the Philippines in context, we see that in recent years, FDIs in the country is declining, and it's the lowest in the region. So it's important to unbundle these. What are the factors that foreign direct investors consider to be able to locate to a country? And this is based on existing literature. We know that quality of institutions, rule of law, quality of human capital, infrastructure, macroeconomic conditions, trade policy, state of technology, tax policy, and market size are important. But again, I go back dun sa sinabi ko kanina that there are different types of foreign direct investments, no? And the effect of these variables vary on the type of FDIs. For example, market size. Market size matters to FDIs who are seeking where to sell their product. Okay, they are not meant to produce and export their product, but they come here to be able to sell to us as consumers. Those types of FDIs will not be concerned on what tax incentives we should be giving them, because these companies are the ones which can actually crowd out domestic investment. Kasi i-compete niya yung diba, yung market natin. And then at the same time, of course, state of technology, the ones who are concerned with high tech, sila yung may concern dyan. So hindi siya one policy fit all in attracting FDI. So the government has to clearly sit down and think of what where we're going to focus, what sectors are we going to strengthen to be able to effectively attract FDIs. Now, the question on whether to liberalize and reduce regulatory restrictiveness of the country to be able to attract FDIs. Kasi ito yung pinag-uusapan, are we very restrictive? I want to point out, kasi ito yung dinidiscuss palagi sa Kongreso kahapon, yung FDI Regulatory Restrictiveness Index of OECD. And they keep on mentioning that the Philippines is one of the most restrictive economy. But they're citing 2020 data. Nakalimutan ata ng Kongreso na sila ang nagpasa ng mga batas noong 2022 that are significantly liberalizing our economy. Nevertheless, some studies, specifically Parcon et al. 2021, this is the latest, they've looked at the importance of restrictiveness in terms of attracting foreign direct investment. And this one is a quote from their paper. Mix yung findings nila. So they did a robustness study to examine really what's the effect of restrictiveness in terms of attracting FDIs. And this is what they said. It's statistically insignificant for all investors when we talk about macroeconomic stability, quality of governance, ease of doing business, and quality of infrastructure. Okay? But nevertheless, sige, let's look at the constitutional provisions and the current policies that we have. We have a constitutional provision on natural resources, but this has been addressed by a Supreme Court decision. For example, in mining. Mining allows 100% foreign ownership already. This is based on the 2001 Supreme Court decision, the Labugal Bilaan versus Ramos. The recent DOE circular amending the IRR of the Renewable Energy Act, classifying renewable energy as not natural resources and therefore no limitations in terms of 100% foreign ownership for renewable energy sector. On land, we've already discussed this. Vietnam doesn't allow land ownership too. Our policies are similar, but this provision in the Constitution also allows Congress to elaborate further on how we're going to use our land. So we have this RA 7652, the Investors Lease Act, which allows the leasing of private land for 50 years and renewable for another 25 years. That's already a lifetime. No? Ang importante sa land, yung well-defined property rights, which will allow you how to utilize the asset that's assigned to you. On foreign investment, again, the Constitution has provision limiting foreign capitalization of 60-40. No? But that provision also gives Congress the power to further define which sector should be limited based on the interest of the Filipino people. And then, because of that, we have RA 11647, again, updated 2022, where the President is given the power to issue a negative list. For the information of the public, even China has negative list, and yet it's able to grow its economy. Okay, these are the negative lists in the executive order of the President, but again, the remaining sectors are the ones we classify as public utilities under the Public Service Act, mass media, education, and advertising. With respect to practice of profession, the limitation is based on existing laws, whether we have treaties with other countries or we have reciprocity policy. Okay, that's my last slide. Just to summarize, I think we should focus on human capital, institutional quality, infrastructure, clear policies on how to implement all these laws and rules that we have, clear implementation of rule of law, and I think the government has to have strategic framework on what FDIs we want to bring to the country. Apologies for exceeding my time, but if you have additional questions, you can contact me through these channels. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Magno. And just a reminder, of course, you can still ask your questions to Dr. Magno. I see some comments on the chat and some questions. So we will tackle that later on. But in the meantime, let's now talk to Attorney Christian Monsod, a prominent legal eagle who toiled hard in framing the 1987 Constitution. What's his take? Are the current moves to amend the Constitution actually legal? What can we expect out of this? Attorney Monsod? Attorney Monsod, I think you're still on mute.
Yes. I was going through my papers and I realized that Shell and first speaker have already covered most of the things I was going to say. So I'll stick to the part that uh, what I made, about the Constitution, um, and say that the immediate trigger, by the way, when we talk about EDSA, was the elections before on February 7. Now, when many people call EDSA a revolution, but the Davide Commission, of which I was a member, that investigated the 7 coup attempts, called it people power revolt because it is unfinished business. And part of the unfinished business has already been have already parts of it have already been mentioned by the previous speakers. Was that but EDSA was not only about the restoration of democracy, it was also the promise of a new social order that remains unfulfilled through every administration since EDSA. And those of us so that turning government owe an apology to the youth, especially of this country, especially those from the poor, for that failure. The fact is that put up our nation to greatness at EDSA, and after we accomplished in 1992 elections, the first peaceful transfer of power in 27 years. We folded our banners, we put away the t-shirts with the imaginative slogans about humor to the times, and we went back to our personal purposes and advocacies. And we went back as we went back our separate ways with our separate causes, we lost something of a dream of a nation and the significance of our interconnected lives. This is why we are in bad position today also. Today, we are still the laggards in our part of the world on mass poverty and inequality that are rooted in a feudalistic system of political dynasties and its companion evil, corruption. According to the recent report to the UN, the Philippines was among the worst countries in handling the pandemic. Today, this is the context of now of this proposals to amend the Constitution. And I'd like just to our people to be cautious about this. Today, we are already on a slippery slope to authoritarianism under the coalition of dynasties of 4 presidents, Estrada, Arroyo, Duterte, and Marcos. Our system of checks and balances is weakening. The rule of law, also mentioned by Shell earlier, the rule of law is on a decline, and the index of corruption is increasing. We have a Supreme Court that deferred to President Duterte on the issue of the sufficiency of the factual basis of martial law, so that now martial law can be declared anywhere and anytime in the Philippines. Then the Supreme Court for Campos went deferred to the president on Senator Laila and on the removal of Chief Justice Sereno. And then there's the impunity, the extrajudicial killings, and the anti-drug campaign, and the creation of pork barrel system for the executive for contingency, intelligence, and so-called public purposes. Money that should be doled to help the poor. A recent study, however, and this is bad news, by the Cambridge University on the Supreme Court on 70 mega cases and the voting record of 86 Supreme Court justices from 1987 to 2021 showed an average voting pattern of about 69% in favor of the government, the appointing power. But Duterte appointees voted 94% in his favor. And today, 13 of the 15 justices are appointees of Duterte. But of course, there are also golden moments in the life of the Supreme Court. We are here today to ask why the Constitution is being blamed as the hindrance to foreign direct investment, which they say is the key to higher growth rates with all its benefits. Blaming the Constitution also exploits the surveys that 73% of our people know nothing of Constitution or very little of it. And that's why I want to give a brief explanation of the Constitution that they want to change. EDSA was the inspiration of the 1987 Constitution. It was the first time that we spoke to the world as a truly independent and democratic Filipino nation. It is a document that had not been imposed on us by a colonial power or by a dictatorship. In our national consultations before we started, we listened to the people, and they preferred the stability of familiar structures, democratic representative presidential system with checks and balances and separation of powers. And we'll bring that up as an issue also on this people's initiative. Overwhelmingly, the people wanted to vote directly for the president. There are a number of provisions in the 1935 and 1973 constitutions that are in the 1987 constitutions. But the three most important themes of our constitution, and this will apply also to why we cannot allow changes in our constitution. First, the heart of the constitution is social justice, with the poor as a center of our development. It was called by the President of the Constitutional Commission, former Justice Cecilia Munoz Palma, as the heart of the new constitution. Hence, the new article on social justice to address not only mass poverty, but also the gross social, economic, and political inequalities that is rooted in a feudalistic system of dynastic families that has been impervious to change for generations, with the corruption that goes with it. The compelling principle is encapsulated in the last sentence of Article 13, Section 1, and I quote, by equitably diffusing wealth and political power for the common good. And I will go over the proposals and see that it violates many of these provisions. Second central theme, never again to any authoritarian government. Hence the strict limitations and conditions for declaring martial law and new provisions in the Bill of Rights to protect citizens against abuses by the state. And third theme of the 1987 Constitution, the national destiny must firmly and safely rest on Filipinos themselves. Never again amendments similar to the 1935 Constitution that gave Americans equal rights to our patrimony and economic policies where even our exchange rates after independence could not be changed without the approval of the United States, which resulted in the foreign exchange crisis of the early 50s. The 1987 Constitution also cut the umbilical cord of our previous Constitution to the United States Constitution. The U.S. Constitution gives primacy to civil and political rights because it's a country of immigrants who all started from the same position and only wanted to be free from autocracy. Hence the emphasis in the United States on individual rights and a market economy. Our Constitution gives social and economic rights equal primacy with civil and political rights because we are a country of inequalities from the colonial days to the present, where the starting positions of the rich and the poor are not equal. Therefore, when you look at social justice is really about the adjustment of the starting positions before we foster the market competition with such development paradigms as, well, it is enough to provide equality of opportunity and a fair process without being too concerned about outcomes. And they say, well, rising waters raise all boats, forgetting that many boats are crammed with people, many without food, amid the luxury yachts of the rich. That is why social justice provisions are even included in the article on the economy. Article 12, Section 6. The use of property bears a social function and all economic agents shall contribute to the common good. And I emphasize this, subject to the duty of the state to promote distributive justice when the common good so demands. To fulfill the vision of a new social order, the state should engage in income distribution programs, primarily quality education and quality healthcare, and 4 asset distribution programs for the poorest of the poor: agrarian reform, urban land reform and farming and housing, ancestral domain and fisheries reform, where the poorest of the poor are. How can the young How can I'm referring to this because one of the provisions they want to amend is the education. How can the young of the poor compete for career and business opportunities with children of the rich when the quality of their education and healthcare are not the same? I accepted to speak yesterday to a school, Filma, and and told them I'm surprised at the remarkable thought where they have many branches now. And I said, I look forward to listen to you, to the young, on their experiences and what they intend to do for the country, for the quality education they are going. Because at the end here, we will say, how will we change things, right? Because many things wrong with us are our policies and our weakened institutions. With regard to the asset reform program, I will not go through all of them, but let me mention only agrarian reform. That they are all underperforming, all of them, because they are either underfunded. Agrarian reform, sorry, was supposed to get 225 billion over 20 years, but got only 175 billion, or with loopholes in the laws on by this distribution of shares instead of land, like of Hacienda Lucita of the Cuancos, which was finally ended by the Supreme Court in 2014. We argued for the farmers and the farmers won. As for urban land reform and housing, local governments can sell their lands to rich land developers with commissions, of course, instead of using them for housing for the poor to save them 4 hours of heavy traffic to go to work. And the indigenous peoples used to own all the land. They were driven to higher ground by colonial masters in complicity with cacique landowners, where they are now facing mining companies who are not only given access to our minerals without any value given to the raw materials, but are also given forestry and water rights. The proposed mining reform bills to change address all this in the mining reform bill to change that, and also environmental externalities, as our previous speaker said, the externalities of mining. And what happened? The mining company killed the mining reform bill twice under the Aquino and Duterte administration, even at the community level. It never even got to plenary. And they were very proud about it. He said it's easy money. Why? Because our Congress, and this is part of the context of why I don't think we should trust Congress, because our Congress is very adept at transactional legislation. They're not only politicians, but also the rich in our country are very adept at that. I hope this introduction to the content of the Constitution will urge you to study it and to devote time and whatever career the young want to pursue, with especially the provisions on social justice, local autonomy, and the Bill of Rights. The Constitution is not the problem. It's very part of the solution. By the way, what are the people being told and the purpose for amending the economic provisions? And only the three, right? Education, public utilities, and advertising. And this I get from the farmers. I'm chief legal counsel for 5 national farmer groups and for some urban poor people. What are the people being told? The people are being told, and I quote President Marcos in an interview last January 23rd, quote, "The 1987 Constitution was not written for a globalized world. We have to adjust to it so that we can increase the economic activity in the Philippines and we can attract more foreign investors," unquote. This is the same president who, who last year said, for me, I quote, "For me, all these things being talked about, we can do without changing the Constitution." Shell was correct. We have already done that. our constitution proves to be resilient because of all the things that are being done to say we are now open to business. The president, after all, is the chairman of NEDA, which came out about September 2022, the Philippine Development Plan for 2023 to 2028, approved by the president as chairman of NEDA. That stamp that the country is, quote unquote, open for business. And I think she already mentioned all of these things that have been done to that is cited as open for business.
Attorney Mansod, yes. Thank you so much for that. If you don't mind, we will have to proceed to the next part, if unless you have some very important points you want to raise.
One example.
One example. Go ahead, Attorney Mansod.
Here is the example of the Japanese manufacturing companies leaving China about 4 years ago, who put the Philippines as destination number 4 behind Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam. When the Japanese Chamber of Commerce was asked why, since manufacturing in our constitution is allowed 100% foreign ownership, there was much discussion of the pros and cons, quality of manpower, also like that, and also manufacturing chains, infrastructure, and so on. But what was the most important, finally, factor against us? And I quote, they said, country image. That's what they said. Which they said was they tried to change but could not. A big part of that image was, of course, corruption, including transaction legislation, which would open the door wider by the insertion of that phrase, unless otherwise provided by law, in the economic provisions at which corrupt politicians and greedy big business are very adept. I was once asked, and this is my final word on this, that, did you make mistakes in the Constitution? I said, of course, because the Constitution, because the writers were imperfect. But I think, right from hindsight, that we made 2 mistakes. We overestimated the spirit of EDSA, and we underestimated the greed of politicians for power and of the rich for more wealth. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Mansod. Of course, we will have more chance to listen to Attorney Mansod later on in the program. We have an interaction with the reactors, and we'll also have the Q&A for our viewers and other members of the audience. Now, to further enlighten us or seek further clarifications about the issues on Chacha, we have invited educators to react to the presentations of our distinguished resource persons. To react to Dr. Jean Franco's presentation is the president of the Philippine Political Science Association and UP Political Science Professor, Dr. John Robert Go. Dr. Go, you have 3 minutes.
Hi, thank you, Mike. I would not have any negative thing to say about Dr. Franco's statement, because I basically signed the same statement because we're part of the same department. But I would like to point out 2 things. Now, the first is in terms of the process of amending or revising the Constitution. If what they are saying is that they will just like to change certain provisions, then that's amendment. We're basically amending the Constitution. But the question there is, what is the process being undertaken? And I think if people, especially those in Congress right now, particularly the House of Representatives, are trying to fast track this without sufficient consultation, and just assuming that since they are district representatives, they have the direct power to overhaul or change certain provisions of the Constitution, then probably there's something wrong about that. Because changing the Constitution is not just on the powers or in the hands of the Congress, or of the House of Representatives, but more importantly, I think the people should be involved in the process of identifying which ones should be amended, which one should be revised, and the process should involve the people. So basically, that's one. The second one is the question of changing, amending, or revising the Constitution itself. Constitutions are institutions, written institutions. So we are basically talking about how the state, the government will be formed. And therefore, it only presents to us one part of the equation. Constitution is just one part of the equation. The other part of the equation are the people who occupy the political offices. So we have a framework. The Constitution is a framework, and we blame the framework as if the framework would be the one that is that's the source of the problem, or on the other hand, we see the Constitution as the one that will solve all the problems. We should not look at the Constitution in that manner. Rather, we should look at the Constitution as the framework that will help those who occupy political offices to implement or to execute certain other specific laws. And therefore, if the problem is in terms of yung mga sinasabi nating poverty and all of that, corruption, these are human factors. And I think the Constitution can only give us so much. The human factor, therefore, should be the one we should be seeking to address. The politicians who are corrupt, the dynasties who are entrenched, okay? And therefore, how we look at this question of constitutional change should not just be looking at the question of changing which provisions of the Constitution, but rather, if we look at the entirety of the political system and also try to blame those who are implementing these provisions, who should have made our lives better from the very start. Yeah, so that's my intervention here, and I think will be open.
Yes, Dr. Go. Thank you. You emphasized in your reaction the importance really of the people who are running the show, so to speak, who are occupying political offices. And for Dr. Franco, she was saying earlier that this is certainly almost a done deal from all indications based on those who are sitting in power. And you have the president now saying that he confirms that he wants the charter change plebiscite to be done simultaneously with the 2025 midterm elections, saying holding it separately will be costly. He just said that now. From your analysis of what's going on, is the president all in behind this charter change? Is it limited to just the House Speaker wanting his amendments to the Constitution to be introduced? What's your reading of the whole thing? Why is this happening now? Dr. Franco?
Yeah, my sense is that the president was just convinced, no, to take this on. Remember this, he categorically said during the 2022 campaign that he was not for charter change. He also said that there are more urgent matters to address. So, I mean, in less than a year to his term, he already said that he's for charter change, specifically amending the economic provisions, no? Sorry, less than 2 years to his term. So that's very different compared to previous attempts to change the charter, where the presidential impetus was there from the very start, specifically in contrast with the Duterte charter change proposal, which was his campaign promise. And we're now seeing that the president already bought into the issue. He's very much involved now, even talking to both houses of Congress. And that's, I must say, a weird turn of events. No, so yeah, let's just wait and see. But as I said, I mean, the problem with combining the plebiscite with 2025 elections is that it might muddle, once again, more important issues, because that would make the constitutional change proposal to be the #1 issue come 2025 elections if they're combined. But of course, I understand that they're also concerned with the cost. But if they're concerned with the cost, then why bother to change the Constitution when the economists say that there are enough laws and safeguards already?
Dr. Go, you agree?
Yeah, I agree, because I think the issues that are more important, especially if we mix the plebiscite with the midterm elections, that the issues that are important that should be raised for the midterm elections will be eclipsed, will be overshadowed by the discussion on the Constitution and changes in the Constitution. And therefore, we are basically clumping all of these issues together. And I think, no, I think there are more important issues. For example, the pandemic has just ended, but we're still feeling the impacts and the effects of pandemic. So how do we grapple about that? I think these are important issues that also has to be raised. But then we are busy with the issue of constitutional change, which might not be directly associated with the, with the livelihood, with the, the things that are closer to the tummy of the people. Yeah.
And Dr. Franco and Dr. Go, to what extent do you think this moves to amend the Constitution now, the timing of it, and the context, how is it affected by the ongoing squabble supposedly between the Marcoses and the Dutertes? Is this a proxy war of sorts, that this is one of the battlegrounds? What's at play? What's the bigger play here?
Well, go ahead.
Well, I think the Dutertes are just riding into the anti-Chacha movement, if I may say so. And the weird thing is that they change their mind, like their minds and their statements, like they change their clothes. So it's difficult to believe anything that comes from the Duterte's mouths. No?
Dr. Go, before we proceed to another part of the program.
Yeah, I more or less echo what Dr. Franco said, no, about the Duterte just riding this anti-Chacha thing. But I guess it only reveals that the unity team that was there before is no longer united anymore, and that's just bringing all of this cracks coming out. And I guess if this comes to the point that we really have to decide, then it's going to be chaotic in some form, not necessarily violent or bloody, but chaotic. Yeah.
Final note, just curious, the fact that they had to go through a people's initiative to determine how Congress, how Senate, and the House will vote, they want the vote to be joint, and that's the only question in the people's initiative. Is that indicative to you, or what does that tell you about the power balance now in the Senate and in the House? Very quickly.
Well, I guess the fact that they had to go through that is just because they wanted to manufacture, quote unquote, the sense of public clamor. And the fact that it was not transparent, we just woke up January 2024, and then there's this signature campaign tells us how they really want this to be fast tracked. No, yeah, that's.
Can I answer? Can I just comment something about it?
All right, go ahead, Dr. Masad.
Yes. The House has a long list of charter changes they've been passing for the past year. Right? I have a long list of it. And they tried to go to the Senate to get a 2/3 vote of the Senate for a constitutional convention. They could not get it. Then they went to the House, to the Senate again, for a 3/4 vote on a constituent assembly. They did not get the vote either. That's why the People's Initiative is their last card in order to the process. And some of them are still ongoing. I just talked to a group in Manila, Sampaloc group and so on, and they told me that they are still doing it. If the implication of the so-called compromise agreement between the Senate, the House, and the President was that it is going to be the Senate who will lead any changes to the Constitution, and the Senate said, well, but only on 3 provisions, economic provisions. And if you go through those 3 economic provisions, they're really not necessary. As already explained earlier. So, spent 13 billion, if the plebiscite. So now they're talking about 2025 to do it, to do 3 small, rather meaningless changes in the Constitution. Don't kill me, right? The President has been lying about this since the elections. I think the lady said it. First, he said that for it. Then he said it's not a priority. Then he said Then he said, I do not want to interfere with the House. It's an independent agency. And then finally he said he will study it. Did he study the Philippine Development Plan that mentions nothing about charter change in order to achieve objectives? The $73 billion of pledges he got from abroad, did any of them have a condition for charter change? None. So the deal, it seems, behind all this is that the charter change is going to be much bigger than we thought it was going to be, and they're going to include a plebiscite in the elections in 2025. So I mean, let's not kid ourselves on this. The signs are so obvious. Okay.
Thank you, Attorney Mansad. Dr. Go, would you like to say something before we move on?
I'm good. Thank you very much.
All right. So now to react to the statements of Dr. Shelo Magno earlier, we now have with us Professor Felipe Salvosa II. He is a PRO of the PCS and head of the journalism program of the University of Santo Tomas. He will be reacting to Dr. Magno's statements earlier. Professor Epe, go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon to all of you in the Zoom room and everyone watching on YouTube and on Facebook and the different pages who are cross-posting our live stream today. Thank you to Professor Magno for your dissection of the proposals to amend the economic provisions of the 1987 Constitution. I think every time the discussion of changes in the Constitution crops up, the discourse becomes almost too predictable, no? So every time Chacha comes out, there's always talk of they're doing it because politicians want to extend their terms, no? So I think one aspect of the 1987 Constitution that's really done the work of keeping politicians in check is the single 6-year term limit of the president. So when a president is out of power, he is really out of power, as we can see in the case of our former presidents, including former President Rodrigo Duterte. They cannot come back. There's no more coming back. So term extensions. The second one is whether we will do it via con-as or con-con, meaning to say, and then when we talk about con-as, is it going to be voting separately or voting jointly? So these are the common discourses that are always cropping up when it comes to Chacha. And then these discussions are always predicated with proposals to confine the amendments to the economic provisions, no? As if amendments to the economic provisions carry automatically pure and good intentions for the Filipino people. So I think Dr. Magno is right that we need to examine the motives and the implications of the economic provisions that they want to amend. We need to question the basis and the premises of these proposals. For instance, the passage of amendments to the Public Services Act during the Duterte administration undermines their argument that the goal is to increase foreign direct investments. As we have seen, the amendment to the Public Services Act now allows 100% ownerships, 100% foreign equity ownership in sectors like telecommunications. No, of course, there are a few remaining sectors in our constitution that are close to foreign direct investments, and that includes mass media and education. Although if you look at mass media, what was the intention for blocking off foreign equity in mass media? At that time, when there was no internet, no social media, and cable TV is not that prevalent, I think Attorney Monsod could validate this. the intention was to prevent foreign foreign agendas, no, to cloud public discourse in the Philippines, no. As as we can see, time has the passage of time has rendered that provision of the Constitution almost ineffectual, because right now Filipinos are bombarded with foreign content, no, from foreign news organizations. The CNNs and BBCs of the world are easily accessible to Filipinos. But then again, we have to consult all of our stakeholders. Is it a good idea to allow foreign equity in mass media? Maybe not 100%, but what proportion of foreign equity should be allowed in mass media? Because we should also look at the experiences of other countries. For instance, in Poland, one of the problems there is that mass media is controlled by the superpowers that sandwich Poland, no? Germany, for instance, and Russia. So the Polish are consuming mass media that are influenced by the superpowers, no, that are colliding in that sphere, no. So we have to ask, we have to discuss this. What kind of foreign equity? What is the proportion of foreign equity that could be good for sectors like mass media and advertising that will allow these industries to innovate, to reinvest, and perhaps ameliorate the level of compensation of workers in these industries. I think Professor Magnus' reaction to one of our guests here is instructive, no? That even in industries like mining, where ownership of FTAAs can be 100% foreign owned, it can be 100% foreign equity, we have not really benefited from mining as a result. So that is a valid issue that we should reflect upon. Siguro to wrap things up, what I'm going to say is nothing new. So this cha-cha process, I would say, is too important to be left in the hands of politicians. I agree with Attorney Monsod and the other resource persons that we should be more consultative, you know, and we should listen to the wise counsel of our bishops, who said that people's initiative should really come from the people rather than from self-interested politicians. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Salvosa. And Professor Salvosa touched on this, but I do want to ask Professor Magno, Dr. Magno, about those industries which are still 100% Filipino-owned. We still have a negative list for them. For example, the media, as Professor Epet said, they have education, land ownership. Is there not any argument in support of allowing foreigners to come in? Or is there really a good reason to keep them out? For example, if you're concerned that lands can suddenly be owned by, for example, Chinese trying to come and flock to the Philippines or trying to control the media, what's the logic for these provisions? And what's your take on allowing foreign ownership for almost all, or in fact, all our industries in the Philippines? Is that a wise move?
Yeah, I think one primary reason why we have restriction is also concern for national security. Okay, other countries have restriction, and that's why it's 60-40, because it has to be Filipino controlled, especially for sectors that are very exposed to foreign intervention. For example, di ba madalas natin pag-usapan yung National Grid Corporation of the Philippines and how risky it is that China has a significant investment in that sector. Imagine allowing a foreign company owning the distribution of water in the country, and then all of a sudden we had a conflict with that country. Then they have a control of the quality, access to water, etc. So national security is a big consideration. I have no objection in terms of liberalizing the mass media sector. But the question is actually, as Professor Salvosa already pointed out, the sector is experiencing competition already because of evolution in technology. And the exit of CNN showed the degree of profitability of the sector. So opening the sector does not guarantee entry of investors in the sector, because we have to look at whether it's still profitable or not. With respect to education, of course, I fully support the liberalization and the entry of foreign universities in the country. But the immediate question before us is that we have limited resources. We have to allocate them. We have to prioritize. Are we really going to go through this process of amending the Constitution just to allow 100% foreign-owned universities to be in the Philippines? With respect to the education sector, I think our problem is how to improve basic education. And the amount of money that we are allocating in the education sector is very small compared to other countries, including Vietnam. In Vietnam and India, the way they improve the education sector is not by relying on foreign universities coming into their country, but actually providing support to their students to study abroad and then come back and invest and grow their IT sector. On land ownership, we can look at Singapore experience. They're allowing foreign ownership of land, and now they have an issue in terms of the increasing price of real estate property and access of Singaporean to real estate property. But then going back to again the issue of FDI, is it really a constraint, the land ownership? And we have seen in the literature that it's not an issue. And the Vietnam experience is an example of that. The investment in Vietnam is significantly higher than investment in the Philippines, and yet they only allow leasing and not ownership. So those are my concerns with respect to the remaining items that have not been liberalized.
Professor Pe, your concerns about these remaining items which are still not liberalized. You did mention something about the media earlier, but what about the other provisions, but for the other industries that still remain 100% Filipino-owned? Which of them do you think can be opened for an ownership? Which ones should remain 100% Filipino-owned?
I don't think there are still provisions or specific industries that are limited to just Filipinos. We are open to partnership. Some tech sectors allowed 40% in the executive order of the president. There are varying degrees of ownership. And as I said, the basis for that is one, in terms of the national security risk. There are prohibitions in the Constitution, which we have identified already, the four sectors. And then, I mean, other strategy with respect to prohibition would factor in the differences in the types of FDIs. It's not that we don't allow 100% ownership, but for example, if a company would locate to the Philippines, an FDI, but the reason why it's locating is so that it can sell its shampoo to the Philippine market. You don't really just open up and say, come here and we'll give you what? A 7-year tax holiday, don't pay corporate income tax, right? You know what's gonna happen. It's gonna crowd out local entrepreneurs producing shampoo kasi yung local entrepreneurs natin, we tax them diba? Our SMEs, we tax them. But now we're allowing FDIs that are market seekers to have the same incentives and zero tax. Those are, these are things that dapat pinag-iisipan na ng gobyerno ngayon. But I think related to your question kanina, na talaga bang part ng economic reforms na kailangan tutukan ng gobyerno, I think President Marcos actually realized that he's not able to increase foreign direct investment in the country, and he realized that it's easier to blame the Constitution than do the difficult job of improving institution, addressing corruption, improving the energy sector, improving human capital, to explain why he's not able to attract foreign investors in the country. Kaya hindi ako naniniwala that this is the solution. I already identified, we've enumerated what the government has to do to be able to attract foreign investment because the economy is open. And yet they continue to insist that it is the Constitution that's the problem. So I think they're looking for a lame excuse for their non-performance.
Professor,
I agree with Dr. Magno.
Go ahead.
If tomorrow we declare the entire Philippine economy open for foreign investors, we will continue to have the same bureaucracy, that will approve all of the applications and the investment incentives, all of the same bureaucracy in City Hall will approve the permits, and the same number of signatures that are required to open a business or secure a mining FTAA or MPSA, things like that. So I think in one of the hearings, and it was mentioned by one of the heads of the local investment banks, no, that we cannot neglect, no, the need to improve the business environment, the business climate, making sure that doing business in the Philippines is easy, walang bribes, no. I mean, if one day we say Philippines open to foreign investors, then who's to say na our bureaucrats, our politicians will not exact the same bribes from these investors? Baka yun pa ang motivation, no? Mas maraming mas maraming
Yeah.
bribe.
Yun
Mike,
nga.
may I add
Go
another
ahead.
concrete example? When I was Undersecretary of DOF, and lumabas din naman to sa news, the Japanese firms threatening to leave the country, right? It's not because of the constitution, it's the inefficiency in the reimbursement of VAT credit. So meaning the BIR. And what has the government done to address the inefficiency in terms of reimbursing tax credit to BIR? Wala. And the Japanese threatening to leave, diba? Tax administration reform, computerization, e-invoicing, matagal na sa pipeline yan.
Professor Magno, we're not even talking yet of the high costs of doing business in the Philippines, no? Like the
Yes.
power costs,
Low quality of human capital. No?
the infrastructure, no? So
Oh.
these things we have to look at holistically.
Ako, ang dami pang pwedeng pag-usapan na Dr. Magna, Professor Salvosa. Actually, I would want to ask sana, who tends to benefit from this? How can we ensure that if the economy is opened up, if the economic provisions are revised or amended, how can we be sure that those the farmers, those in lower levels of society can actually benefit from these changes from the Constitution? But I guess it's a long discussion, and I was told we have to move on. So we'll have the call Father Wilmer Tria, the Advocacy Chair of the Catholic Educational Association of the Philippines and the President of the Bicol Association of Catholic Schools, to react to the presentation of Attorney Christian Monson. Father Tria? Father Tria? Go ahead.
Yes, I'm here. To Attorney Christian Monson. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a constitutionalist, not an economist. I'm not even the president of the CAP. Father Albert Delvo just asked me to represent him. So I'm just a voice or a noise, depending on who is listening to me. First, I like the opening statement of Attorney Christian, that EDSA is a work in progress. So our achievement is the 1987 Constitution. But it's just the bedrock of democracy. Unless people are empowered, it's just a work in progress. I mean, there's no real, genuine democracy in the country. So authoritarianism is right at the doorsteps. Actually, once in a while, it enters our house. But the real focus is first to preserve the 1987 Constitution, while we have the great task, the long-term task of empowering the people through economic, educational reforms. You know, DepEd's profile of a graduate is that they are equipped with 21st century skills. I said that's not enough because we are not meant to be workers of the rich countries. We are supposed to be good and responsible citizens. Therefore, the focus must be on critical thinking. Democracy is about numbers, so the majority of the Filipino people must really be equipped with critical thinking. So that is one. Second is moral recovery. There's a great gap between faith and justice. So I'm happy to hear that the heart of the Constitution is social justice, equal distribution of goods. So if we hear that 80% of the wealth of the country are in the hands or in the pockets of our politicians, then there's no social justice. So again, it's a work in progress. And the last one is livelihood, productivity of the people. So that's my first reaction. Second, I also like the final statement of Attorney Monsod. He said that we overestimated the achievements of EDSA, but we underestimated the greed of our politicians. So to me, to trust that our politicians want to change the Constitution for the common good is not only naivety, it's not only mediocrity, but it's stupidity. I mean, if you cheat in the elections, if you are elected by the slot machines made in China, how can we trust that you are going to work for the common good? So we should remain to be vigilant. All these attempts to amend, like focusing only on education, on the economic provision, these are diversionary tactics. So we should not lose sight on the fact that they just want to perpetuate themselves in power. So that's my second. And the last one is about the economic provision, the FDI, and so on and so forth. The poison that's ruining our country is begging and shopping. People flock at municipal halls to beg, and then only to hop at city malls to shop. So if that's the activity of the people, then there's no future for our country. We become a nation of beggars. Whenever there's election, people flock at municipal halls to beg. And then the culture of shopping is being promoted through different programs like the 4Ps, like the extended long weekends, early Christmas bonuses, so that we drain our pockets, so that we go back to our politicians and beg again. So, but we are silent about productivity of our country. We just want to relax the taxation so that we can import products and buy them. But we're not working hard to invest on chemists, on mechanical engineers, so that the cacao that we produce here can be turned into good chocolates. In Switzerland, they have minimal agricultural window because of the snows, because of the Rocky Alps, and yet they produce the best chocolates in the world. So we're not a nation of producers. We're just a nation of consumers. So I keep asking my students, why is it that we are one of the poorest countries in the world, but we have the biggest malls in the world? Because we are shoppers, because we are beggars and shoppers. So that's an illness I see in our country. And that requires real thinking, real discernment, real reform. That's all. Those are the 3 points.
All right. Thank you, Father Tria.
Attorney Monsod.
All right. Thank you, Father Tria. Now, Attorney Monsod, I just want to ask, what do you make of the fact that the so-called People's Initiative that they're doing now, gathering signatures supposedly from the public, and there are allegations that this is in fact actually being done under the orders of the House Speaker. Is it the proper mode for a proposal to amend the Constitution to be done through a People's Initiative, supposedly, and yet the people behind it are actually House lawmakers, congressmen? Is that an abuse of the provision, or is that actually acceptable when you contemplated that particular form of amending the Constitution?
You want an answer for me?
Go ahead, Attorney Monsod. That's for you.
Okay, let's put it this way. When I was talking to the people the other day in Sampaloc, I was telling them, alam po ninyo, ang tawag dyan, People's Initiative. Ibig sabihin yan nanggaling sa inyo. Hindi naman ang tawag dyan is Congressman's Initiative. Kayo ang dapat nag-umpisa itong mga ito. Ngunit sinasabi nyo sa akin na hindi pinapaliwanag sa inyo kung ano talaga ang ibig sabihin na babaguhin o idadagdag yung voting jointly. Alam niyo, if you read the case of Santiago case and also the case of Lambino, sinasabi nila na there is no law for a people's initiative to change the constitution. Kasi there are three, right? Plebiscite, yung people's initiative for national legislation, local legislation, and change and amend the constitution. Sinabi na nung case doon, ang ponente po is si Chief Justice Davide, na wala description kung paano mangyayari yung People's Initiative to amend the Constitution. Kasi po, ang dapat, the process should include pinapaliwanag, ano ba ang consequences, ano ibig sabihin nito na hindi na ang boto ng Senado parang isang boto lang ng congressman. Hindi pinaliliwanag yun sa kanila. Kasi malalaman ng tao, teka muna, ang ibig sabihin doon sa Constituent Assembly, total control ang House. Mawala na ang Senate doon, sabi ko. Ganun po ba yun? Oo. Kasi dapat doon voting separately. Sabi ko, may omission kami doon sa Constitutional Commission na hindi namin dinagdag yung voting separately in three provisions. One of these is this. The other is tax amnesty and amnesty, right? But over the years, the House and the Senate have accepted that the interpretation should be separate. Kaya yung binundi nila ng House yung Constitutional Convention and Constituent Assembly, the implication was voting separately. Kaya hindi nila nagawa yung ginawa nila. Kaya they resorted to people's initiative. So sabi ko sa mga unang-una, dapat sabihin, teka muna po, kausapin yung mabuti ang congressman ninyo. Huwag kayong magagalit, pero kailangan marami kayo because you have the numbers to say na masama po yata mangyayari dun sa ating constitution dahil dyan. And that's what you should be doing. And because they asked me, how do we change this? Sabi ko, there is one thing that pandemic achieved, which I like. The pandemic, what the pandemic showed us was that many communities solve the problem when those who have the means help those who needed help. Like the pantries, right? Community pantries. What does that show us? It showed us that transformation is possible in our country from the bottom up. Tayo lagi nang sino man ba ating presidential candidate? Sino ba ang ating senatorial candidate? Hindi po The solution from the barangay. So sabi ko sa mga tao, mga farmers ko, tsaka mga urban poor, you have the numbers of sovereignty. Sovereignty resides in the people. Use that power. Because sinasabi sa atin, the best way that you lose power is when you think you don't have any. You have the numbers. So you choose your people at the barangay, then you wait another 3 years and you choose your people for municipalities, another 3 years for provinces, and eventually national. And this process, it cannot be done overnight. Kailangan tayo, who are intermediaries lang tayo We're intermediaries. And we should always help them, identify, help, and so on. And we should retreat and go back to different life once there are enough elected officials or appointed officials who come from the poor, when they can act for themselves. We are just intermediaries. Sabi ko rin sa church, we need the church for this. In order for the church to help the poor, protect the poor from threats and all that, until the poor have control of the barangays. This is the good lesson that was shown to us by the pandemic. That transformation is possible from the bottom up. And that's the only way we can do it when we have a new generation of leaders who come from the poor. That is when we're going to change. And EDSA was listened by international audience, and it brought many of our international TV audience to tears by the nobility of its purpose. Now we have ahead of us the change that we have promised the poor, and there is a way to do it, and that's transformation from below until we have a new generation of leaders who come from the poor.
Attorney Rizal, thank you. We're still not letting you go. I'm just transitioning to the next part of our forum, which is the Q&A. We have some questions lined up for you. And let us hear also from our Zoom participants and viewers. If you have questions, either on Facebook or YouTube, you can send your comments online. I will try to read some questions and comments given the limited time we have left. But the first question, Attorney Rizal, goes to you, and this is from Francis Magno. Why did the framers leave the creation of an implementing law on people's initiative to Congress and not simply enshrine it in the Constitution without need of an enabling law?
Well, if we are going to put in the Constitution the contents of every enabling law of the principles in the Constitution, you will have 10 volumes of the Constitution. That's precisely the part of Congress. Now, that's what the same thing that Congress says. Bakit hindi yun nilagay sa Constitution kung ano yung relationship ng anti-dynasty, 2 degrees, 4 degrees, and so on. So, sa kanila, ganito yun. When we were studying this, we were discussing it, and sabi na, pag nilagay natin sa Constitution yan, ngayon, ang kailangan prohibition should be 4 degrees. What's that? First cousins. So, if we put that there is part of the Constitution, you need to amend the Constitution. If 10 to 15 years old from today, or 20 years old, we have matured enough as a democracy so that we only need 2 degrees. And if in 30 years, we also have matured some more, we may not even need it. That's why we said, because Congress keeps on telling us, we need to change the Constitution because it doesn't adjust to circumstances, it's not resilient enough. And here we are with a provision in the Constitution for anti-dynasty, and they have sat on it for 36 years. Another one that I'd like to bring up is that yung party list system. Unfortunately, 2 bad decisions of the Supreme Court, that the party list system is a proportional representation. It is not limited or exclusive to those economically poor. It is an implementation of social justice provision of addressing inequality, not only in economic, but in social and political inequalities. And this is part of what. Sabi namin, no, that we have a lot of people who say they know have ideology for a better Philippines and so on. Why don't we give them a chance to be heard in Congress? Let be the place where we can hear all of the alternatives available to us. But meron lang reserves for 9 years, 3 consecutive, na meron for marginalized nakalagay doon yung mga areas, no? But after that, it must be proportional representative. We only need 3 amendments to the party list system that is now being abused by politicians. 3. Number 1, anti-dynasty provision. Number 2, remove the limit of 3. This is proportional representation. A group earns enough votes for 6 or 7 representatives, and you give them only 3. Where do you give the other votes? Today, the COMELEC gives the other votes to other party lists, even if ideology is different from who they voted for. So take out that limit. If they are entitled to 7, give them 7 representatives. And number 3 amendment, there is a phrase in the law that says that the candidates must be organic or members of the group. An exception is they have a track record of advocacy for the group. Palusot yun. Palusot. In fact, Justice Castro said, si Justice Tony Carpio said, we cannot legislate, but this must be changed by legislation. Kasi what a resident of Forbes Park, this son of a president, represented tricycle drivers. That is not party list system. So with these three provisions, we can change. We can change the quality of the elections, both the quality of the process and the quality of the vote. Now, quality. What about doing about the warlords? We already were told in 2-3 years ago that 20 new armed groups in the in Mindanao, right? There are 2 million arms that are not licensed. What is the PNP doing about this? So that we don't have the use of money, the use of force that devalues the quality of the vote of the poor, particularly. They're the majority in our country, right? They will not vote. They will not vote. But for people who are what do you call it, warlords or so on, but they have no choice. They have poor choices. We have to give them more choices by taking away all of these restrictions that devalue the quality of the vote in elections. We have so many things more that we can do on legislation. I'm telling the Congress, what are you doing changing the Constitution? And it's even not very meaningful for those three areas. Why don't you legislate a anti-dynasty provision? Why don't you amend the party list system? Why don't you amend the mining law? There's so many things that can be done by them. And what are they to change the Constitution in order that they can have more power? When you shift to parliamentary system, they combine the executive and the legislature, correct? That gives them more. And then the prime minister has no limit on his term. He's elected by parliament and not by the people. And that's what I'm told that they'll be doing if they have once they get the chance to change more of the Constitution. Right? I have a long list. If you look at the list of the House, right, this is not the place to do it, but I have a long list of what they're going to do with the new Constitution. And we must not allow this charter change to take place.
Attorney Monson, a couple of questions here. I guess some of which you've already answered. One from a PCS member. You said earlier that the Constitution is not perfect. Which provisions need amendment and what is the legal way? I believe you have answered some of the questions, but his question is, what is the legal way? And I'll just wrap this with another question asking if you would question Chacha before the Supreme Court if you think that's not legal. Go ahead,
Yes.
Attorney Monson.
Of course, you will question the Supreme Court on constitutionality. And of course, what's happening at the top within the four dynastic families, there seem to be all kinds of disagreements and so on. And one of the factors here is how will the Supreme Court decide and who has the influence in the Supreme Court, correct? So I think that we will go anyway, because when we fought against Sigaw ng Bayan of Arroyo, we were told, Chris, why are you filing this? Out of the justices, 10 were appointed by Arroyo. Well, you have no chance. Well, we won by an 8-7 vote, and Arroyo's appointees voted 5-5. And when we went after Hacienda Luisita, they said, no, empowers, Pinoy nandyan. Oh, well, we won that case for the farmers, 13-0 in favor of the farmers. My point is, there are golden moments in the Supreme Court, and let us pray. And if you have connections, let us try to influence and tell the justices, we are taught in law school. Legislature is the purse, the executive is the sword, and the Supreme Court is the conscience of the nation. And their claim to legitimacy is their independence because they are appointed people. Those are elected The source of legitimacy is the vote of the people.
Mhm. Mhm.
Unelected and appointed, their source of legitimacy is their independence.
Attorney Munson,
But
there's another question from Mr. Joseph Solis from the chat. Would it be more beneficial to our country to completely remove foreign equity ownership restrictions altogether from the Constitution to assure the irreversibility of FDI liberalization laws that would allow our country to forge FTAs with the European Union, Mercosur, Pacific Alliance, and the United States, or perhaps join USCMA, US, Canada, and Mexico? What do you think of that?
actually, our economy is open. I'm surprised. I mean, I, I, it was already mentioned all of these things. Land can, natural resources is possible under Article 12, Section 2 of the Constitution. Well, utilities already open, not only telecommunications, but transportation. Transportation, because one of the problems in our country is the cost of bringing goods from Luzon to the Visayas. That somebody is even cheaper to go from Manila to Singapore and to Visayas than direct. Now that's open now to foreign ownership. So, as far as I can see, today the Constitution has proven to be resilient with and has adjusted to the so they're wrong when they said that it's stuck there and no, laws have been passed. uh you know I'd like to mention on energy. One of the problems they say is the cost of energy, and yet that's allowed 100% to foreigners. My experience, because I was at Meralco, right, is that when you negotiate with these foreign investors, 100% is theirs. They still would not invest until they get a take or pay provision from Meralco for say 20 years, 15, that you take a certain volume from them regardless of whether you use it or not. And that's why it's part of the high cost of electricity in this country. It has nothing to do with the Constitution, because the Constitution allows 100% ownership for power generation.
All right. Thank you, Attorney Munsod. Very, very quickly, I know we're supposed to wrap up, but I can see Dr. Magno smiling there earlier. And there's just a very quick question. Allowing foreigners to become freehold legal landowners would make marrying Filipino nationals unnecessary to circumvent the ban. 25-year lease lands cannot be more mortgageable. What do you think of this argument, that you will allow foreigners so that they don't circumvent the law?
That's that's part of the law, but I do think that's a major problem in our country. That is not that is not a reason to amend a constitutional provision. During the hearings, in one of the earlier hearings, the foreign chambers of commerce admitted that if land is allowed to be owned by foreigners in our country, the price of the land will be out of the reach of the poor. This is from the foreign chambers of commerce admitting that. And yet, some of our congressmen want to change it. For what? I think it's all about, as I mentioned earlier, it's all about transactional legislation, where our congressmen thrive, And barrel, for example, if you listen to the PIDS study of Professor Manansan, part of the problem is that the money that's supposed to go to the LGUs are instead put at the control of the Department of the Budget. And those Department of the Budget work with the congressman on how to spend those money, particularly infrastructure. That is the source, part of the source of pork barrel. And all you need to do is amend Section 17 of the omnibus of the local government code.
All right. Thank you, Attorney Munsod. Final word, Dr. Magno, very quickly before we go.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Siguro sa final word, I do not agree that we need to amend the Constitution now, particularly on the economic issues. We've already summarized that our economy is very open and we've identified very specific concerns to ensure that we are able to attract foreign investment in the country. I think the president should focus its energy in doing and solving the real problems of the country.
All right, and final word from Dr. Franco.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. No, Constitution, I think, is perfect as we discussed today, but this does not mean that some people can just hijack its being imperfect just to serve their ends. I have no problems with changing or revising the economic provisions of the Constitution, except that I do not see compelling evidence to change them. Thank you.
All right. On that note, we are over time right now. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and for sharing your insights, Dr. Jean Encinas Franco, Dr. Shelo Magno, Attorney Christian Monsod, and our reactors, Dr. John Robert Go, Professor Felipe Salvosa III, and Father William Tria. Now, we now proceed to a synthesis and closing remarks to be delivered by the President of the Philippines Communication Society, Dr. Elena Pernia. Dr. Pernia?
Hello and good afternoon to everyone. There are several dates in February that are dear to us. February 14 is Valentine's Day. February 22 to 25 are the dates we Filipinos commemorate as People Power or EDSA Revolution. Never mind that this year it was delisted as a holiday. February 2 is Constitution Day, a proclamation made by then President Corazon Aquino commemorating the ratification of the 1987 Constitution, which restored democracy in the Philippines. So today's roundtable on Cha-Cha-Cha, mga Indayog at Ritmo sa Pagpalit ng Saligang Batas is very timely. This penultimate day of February 2024, for we talked about the Constitution, people power, and all underscored by our love for country. For some time now, the charter change debate has filled our news media. Advocates for charter change cite the urgent need to amend provisions, particularly the restrictive economic provisions. Meanwhile, those who oppose charter change suspect that these campaigns are mere attempts to perpetuate themselves in power. As pointed out earlier, this is not the first attempt to change the 1987 Constitution, as all administrations after President Corazon Aquino have proposed changes to it. Today's roundtable discussion is our contribution to deepen the students' and general public's knowledge about the current issues that affect our lives. Our webinar began with the welcome remarks of PCS Vice President and Ateneo de Manila University faculty Leonora Hernando. She touched on the mission of PCS, specifically the relevance and importance of discussing the Constitution to our democracy. Our very able moderator, lawyer, and multi-awarded journalist Mike Navalio engaged our panelists in dynamic conversation. His in-depth comments and questions steered this exciting discussion. From Professor Jean Encinas Franco, a member of the faculty of UP Diliman's Political Science Department and member of the Philippine Political Science Association, cited from their position paper. And she pointed out, among other things, that one, historically, Philippine initiatives to change the Constitution were made to break from immediate past and usher in a new political order. The problems that the charter revision wishes to address cannot be done through constitutional amendment, regular legislation, or executive action. The claim that there is public clamor for constitutional change remains unsubstantiated. Constitutional change is not the silver bullet to cure our problems, and current developments show that charter change is a done deal, so that those who oppose the charter change must speak and act now. With reference to the charter change to enable our country's economic resurgence, Professor Shelo Magno of the UP School of Economics educated us on the benefits and limits of foreign direct investments and current policies on foreign investment. While FDIs may foster economic expansion, create new jobs, and enable knowledge and tech transfer, they are not also silver bullet. Even with FDIs, growth cannot always be expected. Importantly, former Finance USEC Magno pointed out that Congress in 2022 already addressed restrictive provisions, citing as examples the current policy on mining, provision for use of land, amendments of the Foreign Investment Act. Our economy, she said, is already very open. Meanwhile, lawyer Christian Monsod, who was one of the framers of the 1987 Constitution, spoke beautifully about the importance of the Constitution and what should be done to amend it. He noted the importance of talking about the Constitution, as 73% of our people know nothing or very little of it. EDSA, he said, was the inspiration of the 1987 Constitution, which had three central themes. One, the heart of the Constitution is social justice, with the poor as the center of our development. Second, never again to any authoritarian government. And third, the national destiny must firmly and safely rest on Filipinos themselves. He warned that we are on a slippery slope to authoritarianism under a dynastic political system. And he lamented that the 1987 CONCOM's mistake was to overestimate the spirit of EDSA and underestimate the greed of our politicians. From our resource persons and reactors, there is an apparent consensus that charter change should not be left to the Congress. President of the Philippine Political Science Association and UP Poli-Sci professor, Dr. Go, called the Constitution a written institution where the people must have a hand in what and how to change it. Dr. Go stressed that the Constitution is just one part of the equation to progress, as the human factor, both its positive and negative characteristics and consequences, comprises the other parts of the equation. Professor Felipe Salvosa II, head of the UST Journalism Program and PCS director, quoted an adage saying that changing the Constitution is too important to leave to the politicians. Professor Salvosa agreed with Dr. Magno that the so-called economic amendments should not be taken as pure and good. Among other things, the people need to appreciate the premises of economic proposals. Father Wilmer Tria, SIAP Advocacy Chair and President of the Bicol Association of Catholic Schools, agreed that Philippine democracy is a work in progress. He also said that with authoritarianism at our doorstep, it is important to preserve the 1987 Constitution, while at the same time improve long-term mechanisms to empower people. One way is through education, which should create learning environments that allow critical thinking. The discussion was extremely rich, and this synthesis has not adequately captured all the points brought out. So I invite you to rewatch this webinar, which is available on the PCS Facebook page, the TVUP website, as well as the YouTube channel of TVUP. This will also be shown on the TVUP channel Signal 101. Ibalita na rin nyo sa inyong mga kaklase, kaibigan, kapamilya para sa patuloy nating pagmumulat. This webinar is in line with the PCS's mission to generate knowledge on current issues and to champion social justice. I wish to acknowledge my co-directors of the PCS board with a special mention of Professor Flor de Lis Abanto, who set this into motion. And to TVUP, our thanks for making this webinar an important educational resource. Inaanyayahan ko kayong lahat na maging miyembro ng PCS. Sana po'y bisitahin nyo ang website namin sa www.philscomsoc.org kung saan nakalahad ang iba't iba naming mga proyekto at programa at ang mga benepisyo para sa mga miyembro. Muli, isang malaking pasasalamat.
And thank you so much, Dr. Pernia, and I look forward to more enlightening discourses on pressing issues beyond sound bites and quote cards. And I personally commend the people behind this because this is a chance for the academics, people in the academe, to go beyond the so-called ivory tower and reach out to the masses, especially through platforms like this on YouTube, Facebook, or through a TV channel, even on cable, to be able to discuss pressing issues. And my wish is that people will talk more about this now. Chacha will always be there for as long as there are people in power who want to extend their term, who have different motivations. That will always be an option. And thus, it's always important for people to ask, ano ba ang motivation? Bakit ba magchachacha? Anong papalitan? Sino mag-benefit? Tayo ba ay uunlad yung kinabukasan natin kapag binago ang konstitusyon? At ang tanong, ang konstitusyon ba, ang saligang batas ba ang may problema? O tayo na nagpapatupad nito kung sinong nakaupo sa pwesto? So friends, this has been Chat Chat Cha, mga Indayog at Ritmo sa pagpapalit ng saligang batas. And I am Attorney Mike Navalio, greeting you all a pleasant afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.